Hi, everyone. This is Alyssa Joel. I work at the MBA Tour. Um, we're a company that helps students find the right business school for them. So, thank you for tuning in to this webinar. Um, we have Scott Edinburgh on the line. He's a longtime partner of the MBA Tour. He comes to a lot of our MBA conferences and presents. So he's going to be presenting on 7 steps to get into an M7 school. So I will let him take it from here.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining tonight, in the morning, depending on where you are. Very excited to be with you all today. And thank you in advance for those of you who submitted questions. We had quite a bit of questions that were emailed ahead of time, and time provided, we'll probably be answering a number of those. So one thing to mention as we get started, we did one of these webinars last month, and in case any of you are new this time, on the right within the GoToWebinar platform, feel free to ask any questions throughout this process. You can just type a question into the questions box, and as we go through the presentation, depending on timing, we'll stop and answer as many of these questions as we can. Okay, so I've been helping applicants get into schools since 2008. A little bit more background about myself. I went to MIT for undergrad, studied economics and business at Sloan. I began my career after undergrad at Deloitte, where I worked in strategy and operations consulting, focused on M&A, and worked across industries domestically and internationally. After Deloitte, I went to Wharton for my MBA, and I picked Wharton because I had kind of always wanted to go there. Studied economics in high school during the summers, and I began Personal MBA Coach while I was at Wharton. I'll tell you a little bit more about the company and what we do afterwards, but top-ranked consultant on poets and quants. We work with applicants all around the world, and we have a 96% success rate. In terms of what we do, and this is a picture from one of the MBA Tour events recently in San Francisco, we provide comprehensive GMAT tutoring and admissions consultancy for applicants throughout the entire process. We have tutors who have scored in the 99th percentile, 790 or above on the test, and 395, 4.0 from top Ivy League schools. And we have a custom process to tutoring. I'm on the board of directors for AGAC, that's the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants, a group that works with admissions directors in various capacities throughout the year. And we offer early planning packages. So for those of you who are thinking of applying in a future year, but not quite ready yet, we help people think through how to perfect their stories between now and when you're ready to apply. We have a team of former M7 MBA interviewers to help with the interview prep and a client network at all the top schools. So step one, developing a strong personal story. Personal stories are sometimes one of the most important things that people are thinking about during the application process. And I have a lot of clients who have angst over the story. What is my story? How do I differentiate myself? What does that really mean? Well, first step is to begin with self-reflection. Think through what makes you unique, what drives you in a lot of the decisions that you've made, and really, kind of take hold of your passions. Now, this does not have to be what you're doing at work day to day. This could be something that you're doing outside of work. You could be interested in swimming or another sport or some kind of volunteer activity to do with the environment. Think about really how you're unique from your peers. And that might not be just being the top performer on a consulting team or in a deal in a bank or on a marketing presentation. One other thing to think through is the circumstances and choices that have sort of shaped you the most today. It's funny, Chicago Booth has a question, some of you might have seen this for this year's applications, that asks you about what drove a lot of the decisions. I think it's a really smart question because if you think through what drove the decisions that you've made, it starts to help you to think through your story. And for those of you that are just joining, see a number of you just kind of joining in now, feel free to ask any questions, type it into the question field, and we'll answer questions as we go. So everyone has a unique personal story. If this were a live presentation where there were voices and we had easy sort of polling and things, there's a polling feature here, but tends to be a bit sort of clunky. I would ask you to participate. So now you can just think on your own. Look at these two profiles, Jenny and Michael, and think through whose profile has a better story. Obviously, one is a higher GMAT score, one is a higher GPA, but think through this. I'll give you a second to read the information. Okay, so here, Michael has the better story. And as you can see, it's not because of the undergraduate school that he went to. It's not because of the GPA, and it's not because of the GMAT. The reason the story is better is because everything connects well. Interests, competitive swimming, teaches underprivileged kids how to swim, mentors teens. We're working within tech. We're building product management expertise in the short term and maybe running product management at a tech firm in the long term. Whereas Jenny's story doesn't necessarily all connect. Different projects across different clients, the short-term goals and long-term goals don't necessarily connect to past project experience. So in this case, Michael really has a better story. But one thing to note here is that everything that you've done in the past does not necessarily have to connect to what you want to do going forward in the future. I have a lot of people that come to me and say, I've made a change in my career, or perhaps I've done a number of projects across industries. How do I message that? You don't really need to talk about everything that you've done in your career to date, as long as you focus on the important points and the points that would really connect to your short-term and long-term goals. Step 2, crush the GMAT. So a lot of this information is information that you might know already, but one thing to call out is the 5-time maximum within a 12-month period. Obviously, scores are valid for up to 5 years, and you can take the test no more than 8 times. Now, this is the official information on the GMAT. What's kind of unofficial is how many times is too many times to take it, right? Often I hear that question. I've already taken it, 3 times now. I don't want to take it a 4th or something like that. So on average, we see people taking the test a few times. So 3 times is fine, 2 times is fine. If you're at the 4th time, let's think about making sure that we're showing progress and we're improving the score by the time we're at that 4th time. And if you're doing that, then I think that's fine. When you're at 5 and above, I think you want to think through why you're taking it that many times and how does that make sense for your overall story and your plan, et cetera. Now, if it's across a long stretch of time, maybe 2 times you took it a couple years ago, that's okay. But if we're taking it 5 times in a couple months and then you have to wait until your sort of calendar year resets, you might want to think through your test prep strategy. So onto the strategy. Start prep as early as possible. Another question I get is, when is it the right time to start studying? And I always say today, right? Because you can never be too early studying for the GMAT. Score lasts for 5 years. Even if you took it in college, you could probably still use the score when you're applying to schools. How to begin? Begin by taking a practice test or 2, get a sense for what your initial kind of baseline is, and think about, how you learn best, and then get the right help. Now, I say that because while, we find tutoring works the best and we offer private tutoring, so clearly somewhat biased there, it's not for everyone. Some people are self-studiers. You can open up a book, read through all the questions, and, get the results. One thing to mention is people often need multiple different ways of preparing. I would say that more than half of our tutoring clients have come from a larger class that doesn't quite give them enough for them. It doesn't quite teach them how to answer questions that they need help answering or the specific sort of guidance. And then some people just open up a book, study for 2 weeks, and they're all finished. One sort of tip I can give you is read some short articles and different top peer articles. That might sound weird, but if you're used to reading, say, finance articles or political articles, and that's what you love, so that's what you sort of read, day in and day out, or nonfiction books, or whatever it might be. Read things in different genres that you're not as comfortable with. You're not as common. It's not as common for your practices, and that will help to enhance your vocabulary. Step 3, network. So networking is good because it can help you to learn about programs. You can learn a lot of essay material and also confirm your interest in some of these programs. So things to keep in mind when you network. Look for people in your office who attend your target schools. This one is a little bit obvious. Hopefully you're already starting to think about this. But if you're at an office that has, people with MBAs, those are great people to start with. You don't need to jump on LinkedIn and make new friends if you don't want to. You can just start looking at home. Consider your undergraduate alumni network. That's pretty important because these people have something in common with you, and it's much easier to reach out to someone who, went to school with you, or at least went to the same school that you went to, who's now a graduate of a school that you want to go to. Obviously, personal and family connections. Now, what to do once you find people? So you find 2 or 3 people from a school, and you feel like that's a good number, which it is. Ask a lot of questions about their experiences. Most people like to talk about themselves, at least to some extent. So open up a conversation asking about things that they liked, things that they didn't like. Don't ask for favors, at least right away. It's always nice to develop a connection over a period of time rather than, hey, Jim, I know you went to Columbia. I'd love to go to Columbia. Can you write a letter for me? It's like, whoa, I haven't talked to you in a couple weeks. Now you're just asking me for a favor. Again, develop the relationship over time. And here, less is more. When I say less is more, I mean, you want to try to have a few good connections per school. So maybe that's 2 or 3, connections per school. But you don't need to have much more than that. Step 4, get stellar letters of recommendation. Now, recommendations can be a whole presentation topic. And I gave a number of talks with the MBA tour in different markets just on letters of rec and resumes. But today we'll just go over some things. You don't need to ask the highest person that you know or the highest partner that you know. Really, someone who knows you well is going to write the best letter for you. So first, find somebody who will just write an amazing letter. It's not worth getting the head of your division or the head of your company to write a letter for you if it's not going to be very, very specific. So you can ignore title, you can ignore prestige. Ensure that they have worked with you for a while. Now, what does a while mean? Ideally 6 months or more. And if you say, well, everyone's 6 months or more, then ideally a couple years. But recency is also kind of important in this process. So you want to think about someone who's worked with you somewhat recently, maybe within the last year or two, unless you have 3 jobs pre-MBA and you're going back 6 years, well then you're probably going to go back more than a year or two to kind of ask some folks for letters of recommendation. Start doing things that you want written about in the letter. What I mean by this is, say you have a low quant score on GMAT and you want your recommender to talk about your analytical abilities. Right? That sounds good, but you don't do that many things that are very analytical. Well, maybe you can take on some new work, ask for new projects, and perhaps do some analysis and modeling. Think about doing things that you want written in the letters. Next is about asking non-professional references if you have strong extracurriculars. So I'll say that this is not very common. I probably see 1 in 10, perhaps 1 in 20 people that ask someone to write a letter who comes from one of their extracurriculars as opposed to their main job. So don't worry too much if you don't have someone. Most people just ask for professional references. Ask your references early. If you're applying this fall, it's a little early to start asking now, but I would say end of April, early May is a good time, especially if you're applying to a school that maybe has a rolling deadline and you might submit in June or July. You want to give them 4 to 6 weeks to write the letters. I say you don't necessarily need to, give them 6 months notice, but it's good to give them early deadlines so that in case they get busy or something happens later in the summer, you're not sitting there kind of sweating bullets at the ninth hour. Using additional influential and alumni letters, it's actually pretty important. Now, when I say it's pretty important, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to do this. So don't feel the need to, run out there and have an alum from all the schools that you're applying to kind of refer you. But just like if you refer someone to work at your company, they're probably that much more likely to get invited for an interview. If someone from a school refers you casually through maybe a character reference email, you're somewhat more likely to be accepted to that school. So in more detail, what makes a good recommendation letter? Specificity. Okay, we need to make sure that the recommender compares you to others. This is very important. I would say probably about 25% of the letters that I see do not really do this. Next is allow the reader to see your teamwork. So what is the work that you're really doing in teams? How have you grown in the past? Have you grown in the past? If so, make sure that we have specific examples. So rather than just saying, Jim is one of the best people in the firm and he's been one of the highest performers that we've had to date, very valued contributor, and we're really going to miss him. Let's say what Jim does. Okay, we already talked about recency a little bit. In terms of honesty, so quality should be high, but at the same time, you're not perfect. Okay, nobody who's applying to schools is perfect. Nobody has managed entire companies with perfection and not done anything wrong, or else maybe you wouldn't be going to business school. So it's fine to have things not be super amazing, and it's a careful balance to find. Make sure that when a recommender writes feedback, it actually is feedback. And this is important because sometimes I see letters that cover feedback such as Mary doesn't delegate well and does too much work on her own. Yeah, technically that's feedback, but I want to know more about what Mary does in the team and specifically, why it's not so great versus, she just does too much. She's too much of an overachiever, let's say. A believable letter is better than something that's better than God. And if you read it and you think, okay, is this actually happening? So detail is pretty important, right? Ensure that the recommender answers the questions. This seems very basic, but I'd say at least 1 out of 3 letters that I see, the recommender doesn't necessarily follow all the directions. Luckily, a lot of schools are jumping on board with the GMAT common letter of recommendation, so that makes the process a lot easier. But you still want to pay attention to question differences across schools. Kellogg is one school that often has an extra question in the letter of recommendation that's not the same as other schools. Wharton's recommendation questions, both of them are totally different from the standard letters. So there's a little bit extra work to do. And ensure that the letter is the right length. So you might want to talk to the recommender ahead of time and say, hey, thanks so much for writing the letter. These are the requirements. For Harvard, we want 550 words. For Columbia, we can do up to 1,000. Stanford is a couple pages. Make sure to highlight this for them because they might not realize the length differences and you wouldn't want to miss out on an opportunity for them to talk about you. So it's very good to talk through these things with your recommenders in advance. That way, when you set them off to write the letters, they know what to do. Step 5, court your dream schools. Now, there are a lot of different ways to show interest in target schools. Visiting campus is great. One thing to mention here is you don't need to visit a school if you're very far away from the school. So I know people are dialing into this around the world. If you're in Asia and you are applying to a school in the US, you don't necessarily need to buy a plane ticket and a visit. Plenty of our international clients, more than half of our clients are international, and I would say of probably like 55%, I guess, of those, maybe 1 in 4 end up visiting schools. So you certainly don't need to visit. But if you are nearby, if you're in New York, you're applying to Columbia, if you're here in Boston, applying to MIT, let's definitely visit, right? It shows interest. Sit in on a class, schedule informational meetings, walk around the campus, right? Get a feel for the program. Is this a place that you think you want to be for the next couple of years? Excuse me. Talk to students and alumni, right? This is really important. Also, reach out to club leaders on campus. I really like clubs because clubs are very special interest groups. So if you find a group of people who are doing something that you really want to be doing, and you talk to them about what they're doing and what happens on campus, and it just feels really great and you get excited, and now you start to have some content that you want to write about in an essay, maybe some extra questions to ask, that's really good. Conversely, if you find a group of people, that are doing something that you want to be doing, but then you just don't mesh with them, that also probably tells you something as well. So I like connecting with club leaders. And again, quality over quantity here. You don't need to have 25 students from every school that you talk to. That might actually work against you. Go to the MBA tour, right? So the MBA tour is a fantastic way to learn about these schools, meet a lot of the admissions directors, make sure to stay positive throughout the whole process. So only ask questions about the schools that paint them in a good light. Try not to ask anything that can be researched online, and this means really anything that can be researched online. If you want to ask the best questions out there, they should be hard questions. I actually like asking a question that forces an admissions director to do a little bit more research and follow up with you. Maybe it's a question that they don't know the answer to, but perhaps they'll go back, they'll research, and they'll send you an email to connect you to someone else. And by doing that, they now have your name in their mind. And lastly, treat every encounter as if it were an interview. What this means is everything is evaluative. So regardless of what you hear from anybody, any interaction with anyone connected to the school is definitely evaluative. That includes the secretary that you're calling to make an appointment to come on campus. Local information sessions. Watch schools' event pages to find events. The reason I say watch the school's event pages is not because I'm babying you and telling you like how to read the internet. It's because these are not all updated ahead of time. So if you go tonight after this talk and go and look up all the top schools and what events they have, and then you go in 2 months, you'll see different events. So it's always good to go back and refresh every few weeks to see what things might be coming in your area. And most schools visit major cities 1 to 2 times a year. If you don't live near a major city, you can certainly try to travel and find one nearby. Step 6, wow them with your essays. So before we get to essays, I'm going to answer a couple questions. So we'll start here. What is a good GMAT score and GPA for someone without an interesting or impressive career or extracurriculars? This is actually a tough one to answer. What I can say here is that you really want to look at the ranges, and if you think you're weaker in some other parts of the application, try to go that much above the range. So maybe instead of getting a median score, get a median plus 20 or so. Okay, come back to questions in a minute. Essays. Essays are the most time consuming. Okay, so how do you write essays? One, take the time. Brainstorm. Take questions one at a time. It's too hard to apply to 6 schools and think about writing all the essays at once. When we work with applicants, the first thing that we do is have a brainstorming session where we talk about personal profile, your background, passions, hobbies, challenges, struggles. And then I think about what are all the pieces of you that I want to highlight for admissions throughout the whole process, what goes in the essays, resume, letters of recommendation, etc. So if you're doing this on your own, take the time to brainstorm. Consider your strengths, hobbies, passions, experiences. Some of these things are going to go in essays, and others, maybe nobody cares about, and they're not that relevant. Outline. So get your ideas on paper. If you're writing 400 words, you might have to write, 10 bullets first, narrow it down to 8, narrow it down to 6, narrow it down to 5, and then spend 80 words on each of those 5 bullets, something like that. Obviously, it depends on the essay. Think about the length and flow. One of the ways that I see people perhaps make some initial errors more often than not is in writing incorrect lengths. So what I mean by this is, we have, say, Columbia's 500-word essay on goals, and I see the first 250 words are about your background. All of a sudden I say, wow, nobody cares. That's not what they ask in the question. So, really think about the length and make sure that you're addressing the points according to what the school is looking for. Keep the first draft manageable. We always start editing when we're at no more than 20% past the limit. And, we keep our clients pretty closely sort of tied to this rule, not perfectly. And the reason for this is it just allows for better writing at the end of the day. Yeah, you can write 1,200 words for a 700-word essay if you want, but then you'll just end up cutting so much away. The whole focus and structure will be different. So try to break an essay down into sections and decide how many words you want to write for each section. And then don't let yourself, exceed that by too much. Edit again and again and again. Editing takes time. When we go through essays, there's no limit to the number of edits that we do, and they're pretty detailed. So line by line, track changes, comments, we're adding content, moving content around. It's quite a hands-on process. And so if you're working on essays on your own, make sure to leave time to edit them a lot. And lastly, proofread, right? So it's always good to ask someone who's not as familiar with your material to review it. Now, this doesn't mean to get 6 different experts to review your essays and give you their opinion. Actually, don't recommend having too many people get involved because you'll have too many cooks in the kitchen and it can get a little bit confusing for you. But it's good to have someone who really doesn't know anything about the process or you at all to proofread at the end. Okay, so some other guiding principles. Answer the question asked, right? This seems very straightforward, but I do see folks that are trying to tell a story and might be saying what they think they want the reader to know without really just directly answering the question. The question asks about a time when you failed and what you learned, and that's what we're going to write about. We're not going to write about your passions. We're not going to write about what we want to do at school X because of this failure. No, we're going to write about the failure and what you learned. Stick to the question. This is in most cases. Sometimes schools do want to hear something that's not, or rather read something that's not necessarily asked in the question, and that's kind of a case-by-case basis, and we work with folks on that. Write authentically. What I mean by this is try not to tell the schools what they want to hear. And I know admissions directors say this all the time, but if you hear it, for myself, an admissions consultant, maybe you'll believe it that much more. Really write authentically, because it can be understood, if you're being authentic or not, especially if you're invited to an interview, and perhaps if it's a school like Harvard or MIT, it really dives deep into your background and asks you a lot of questions about your application. They'll be able to figure out if your writing wasn't authentic pretty quickly. Ensure that the essays fit with your personal story, as we mentioned before. Try to be succinct and don't repeat yourself too much. This is important because you only have so many chances to show school who you are and what you're about. And if you have this great project and all 3 essays going to cover this project, I'm going to read the application, walk away with it thinking, okay, so they had a good experience, but what else? Keep the language approachable. What I mean by this is we're not writing Pulitzer Prize winning writing here. And this is important. Last year we had a couple authors who were clients, and one of the things that I did was help them to actually write essays that were down to earth and easy to read and easy to understand. And those are the ones that work. So big words, fancy words, long sentences, they don't work too well. When you can, try to pick unique topics. Now, this is easier said than done, especially if you want to go into management consulting and you're answering a goals question. It's going to be pretty standard. But if you can, pick something that's unique. Because if you think about it, admissions directors read a lot of essays every day. And if I'm reading 12 essays and they're all about some example, or there's volunteer work, or karate, or basketball, and then something like really out of the blue comes across. That's what I'm going to remember. Step 7, nailing the interview. So what are interviewers really looking for? Okay, they're looking for confidence. I think that's the most important, honestly, because if you can project confidence, then they'll know that you'll probably do well in the classroom and that you'll do well in the interview. So even before these keywords, what are they looking for? They're looking for someone who can interview well and get a job. They want high career placement rates. So they want to take people who can get jobs. That's why they're doing interviews. And they also want fit with the school, right? So they're looking at interpersonal skills, passion. They want to see that you have clear goals, personality. Okay, these are things they're looking for. Now, what should you do? I have this research, reflect, rehearse. So research, I have research here because if you're invited to interview, chances are you did a certain amount of research for the school when you're writing the essays, right? You need to have enough content in your mind so that you can write things down for the schools and convince them that you want to go. But now if you're talking to someone in person, you need to do probably 3 to 4 times the research. Reflect, think about really why you want to go to that school. And that's pretty important because you need to be convincing someone on the other side of the table that they're the best place for you to invest, a lot of money and a lot of time. And then rehearse, right? So obviously the more you rehearse, the better. Now, what types of questions do they ask? Every school asks, different questions, but these are some. Tell me a time when something didn't go as planned. What was the result? Why business school? Why are you interested in the school X? Tell me about a failure. What's a backup plan if your long-term goal doesn't pan out? Or tell me something you're proud of. And we offer interview prep support, and this is a little bit of detail about what we do. We'll talk about our services in a minute, but for interview prep support, there are 2 different types of interviews, really. More than 2, but we'll sort of just break it down to 2. Standard interviews, and schools like MIT and NYU and Columbia, right? So I have standard interviews, and then a group interview. So group interviews, Wharton and Michigan Ross do group interviews. And when we do this, so we have a team of former M7 interviewers that help with doing the interview prep. The group interview is really testing what your dynamics are like in a group, much more so than how you can answer individual questions. So last year, our clients not only got into schools, but got a lot of scholarship dollars. We get much more scholarships than the average person applying to school. Last year totaled over $4.5 million, and here's a sample of some of the schools that our clients are going to. So how can we help? And for those of you who are late joining, my name is Scott Edinburgh. I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach. We're a boutique admissions consulting and tutoring firm. I went to MIT for my undergrad, Wharton for my MBA, and I've been running this firm since 2008 for the past 11 years. I'm on the board of Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants, and we're today with the MBA Tour to talk about ways to get prepared. So we offer tutoring, as mentioned before, brainstorming, personal story development. We help with school selection. Resume is pretty important. We didn't talk a lot about the resume today, but we do a lot of work to make sure that your professional resume is kind of converted to an MBA resume. And then, for essays, unlimited essay editing, guidance on content, line by line, track changes, content. We also help you with letters of recommendation, who to ask, what key points they should cover, and then mock interviews, as mentioned before. For those of you who want to have some additional information, we have a decision-making guide to help you to think through, what some of the right MBA options are. And I had someone who asked, can we send out the presentation? So we'll send out the presentation. I'll also send out another guide as well, a Kickstart guide, have you think through what you should be doing to plan ahead. So in the rest of the time, I'm going to be answering questions. So if any of you have questions and you're not sure if you wanted to add, last time we had tons of questions, feel free to type away and ask. We had a lot of questions that were asked ahead of time, and I'll also read some of those and answer them. Okay, so can we talk about personal stuff that has happened to us? Yes, absolutely. Great question. Personal things are really important actually, because if you only have professional things, it's not quite as exciting. Personal things can be discussed depending on the essay in a lot of the different essays, and often they might be, the basis behind maybe something that you've done, the reason why you made a choice in your life, etc. Under the visit campus list, it states you should schedule informational meetings. Would that mean informational meetings with admissions officers? Are we allowed to contact admissions officers? Great question. So um, probably meetings with people that you want to do something with on campus, not necessarily admissions officers, because many schools just might not have the capacity to actually have you reach out and schedule. Now some schools will, so you do want to look school by school and contact the admissions office and ask them. But really informational meetings with someone who's involved in a club, maybe someone in career services. What recommendations would you have for an applicant from one of the highly competitive demographics? Yes, and I got this question earlier as well. Look, I think that that's a complicated question that does not have a direct answer. So what I mean by that is, everyone comes from a different group, and as you know, it's not necessarily a level playing field when applying, let's say, because schools want diverse backgrounds, and you might not be able to take 100 people from Goldman Sachs just because they happen to get really high GMAT scores. But what would you do? You have to get higher test scores, but really you want to show what about you is interesting. So what are some real impacts that you've had on the community? What's your personal story about? The other thing to think about is often you just need to submit really strong applications. Some people say, from this consulting firm or that firm, so many people apply, how do I differentiate myself? What do I do? If you just submit a really, really strong application, you might have success getting it anyway. I'm 2 months into a new job, but still want to apply this fall. Is it too soon? I don't think so. You would start school with almost 2 years of experience at the new job. So I think you're probably fine actually, at this point. Very good question to ask, but yeah, I don't think it's too early at all. Okay, I have a 3.3 GPA from a top 10 engineering undergrad. Work experience, not management consulting. IB, do I stand a chance to get to M7? Yeah, so these specific, kind of profile questions, you can feel free to send me an email to scott@personalmbacoach.com and I can answer them just because it is so specific to you. But what I'll say here is, yeah, you definitely still stand a chance. Honestly, I don't know enough about you to say whether you would get it or not, but we certainly get people in with, 3.3 GPAs into, M7 schools. So I would need to know more about your work experience, GMAT score, things like that. Should we visit the schools where you were recently rejected and have visited a couple? Should you visit schools where you were recently rejected and have already visited a couple times? I don't think you need to. So I'm assuming you're going to be reapplying. I don't think you need to visit again. Oh yeah, man, thanks for joining. Yeah, so I don't think you need to visit again. If you've already visited a couple times, that's probably enough. There's not really a reason to visit again. It's good to visit if you haven't shown any interest in the school. But if you've already been there a couple times, I don't think you really need to visit again. If we've been involved with religious organizations and have a lot of work there, i.e., 3-year strategy for a temple, conducting spiritual rituals, retreats, etc. Are those good extracurriculars to speak about, or do schools not like religious activities? Yeah, really good question. Yeah, religious activities are great. Definitely nothing wrong with that. I think that they would be good extracurriculars. What they're looking for is leadership and impact. So there's not really any, predetermined, interest or kind of a valuation sheet that says, this kind of activity counts for X, this kind of activity counts for 1/2 X. They're looking for, what leadership you have and what impact you have. If that's on a religious organization, then, great. If that's on like a sports organization or mentorship organization, great. What would you say sets Personal MBA Coach apart from other services? Like, I won't mention a competitor here, but like another service that you mentioned. So, great question. Look, I mean, what makes us a little bit different would be our model. So we have a boutique model where all the applicants work directly with myself, the founder, throughout the process, and we have a small team to support behind the scenes. I'm pretty well connected in the admission space, and everything is a little bit more personalized. Some other places have slightly different models where they'll pair you up with a consultant to work with throughout the whole process, and that person, might not be the founder, might not have as much experience. So I would say the level of experience is and the model is probably the biggest difference. And this is my passion. Started this 11 years ago, and we have everything in house. So we have tutoring in house, and we do the admission consulting, and we have the team of former interviewers. Okay, I interviewed for Tuck round 2, but never submitted the application. If I apply round 1, do they keep notes or is it a fresh start? So technically, it's a fresh start in the application. They won't have that as an interview that's counted for your application, let's say. But that said, you're human, and if that's something that they've looked at and seen before, it could definitely be used during the evaluation process. I'm going to switch to some questions that were asked previously. First, can we get an email of the presentation and the voice recording? Yes, we will be sending this out. So want to know about MBA with major in energy. I'm very interested in energy topic, need an MBA that focuses on energy. Yeah, so best thing to do is to send me an email. I can actually reach out to you separately and send you a list of some good energy schools. But schools like Macombs would be great in energy based on the location. A lot of folks are going to oil and gas. Duke actually has a pretty good focus on energy. Many of the other MBA programs will allow you to learn about energy, but are not necessarily an MBA in energy in terms of a major in energy. Some programs have that, but I think others you'll just be kind of studying classes. What is an M7 MBA program? So it's Magic 7. It's kind of a term for programs that traditionally were ranked as kind of top 7. Do any of the M7s prefer reapplicants? It's a good question. I don't think so. Well, let me rephrase. No M7 prefers reapplicants over another M7, to my knowledge. All schools accept reapplicants, and roughly 10% of classes are made up of reapplicants. So it's actually quite a number of people that don't get in the first time end up applying again and getting in the next time. What about candidates with 10 plus years? What recommendations can you give us? Well, the first thing is I would tell you to think about, is a full-time MBA program right for you, or should you be considering an executive MBA? The other thing I would say is you really want to think through why you want to get the MBA and why now is the right time. So we have people in M7 programs with more than 10 years of experience every year. The numbers are not huge. It's not half of our client load, but we definitely get people with more than 10 years. And for them, we really tell a specific story. So I think the storytelling becomes that much more important. You want to think about what leadership that you have, and you want to think about the specific things that you're doing to give back to the program. So if a school does take someone who has more than 10 years of experience, they really want you to be a strong contributor to the classroom. How do I turn waitlist status to acceptance? That's kind of a complicated question. We offer a waitlist package. It depends on your situation and background. So there's not really one specific way to turn waitlist into and acceptance. How much weight is given to the GMAT in consideration of an application? So there's not a specific percentage, actually, even though it might seem like there should be. There's not a specific percentage. They do look at everything altogether. GMAT's important, work experience is important, GPA, letters of recommendation. I would say if there were a percentage, maybe 25, but that's not anything that I would write down anywhere, let's say. If I received low grades in quant courses during undergrad, does taking the GMAT give me a better edge versus taking the GRE? Yes, because the GMAT, GMAT was first designed for business schools. Also, the quant score on the GMAT, allows you to showcase a better performance. So the quant is harder on the GMAT. Therefore, if you get a perfect quant score, that's really good. And there's no ability to get that high of a quant score on the GRE just because the quant is easier on the GRE. Is there something you consider the single most important part of a candidate's journey to an elite MBA? Story, goals, GMAT. Definitely not goals. Goals are not the most important thing because your goals are not going to be all that unique probably. And if they are super unique, then I'll probably question you and ask you why they're that unique. I would say the story is going to be the most important because if you think about it, for every 100 people who are applying to a school, maybe 75 or 80 of them are qualified and perhaps 10 to 20 are getting in. So I can't say GMAT score because if you get an 800 on the GMAT, it doesn't mean that you're getting in everywhere. You might get rejected everywhere. And the results came back from Harvard this week, and some Stanford out today, and I have people going to both of those schools that are nowhere near the top of even our client list in terms of GMAT performance. So GMAT alone doesn't necessarily lead to it. I would say the story, the way that you can put everything together and present an impactful story. Let's see. Is 710 a borderline score for M7, or should I go for higher? So I would need to know more about your background. I would generally say that you should try to score higher if you're lower than the average score. I will also say that we have people in M7 schools with 710 and below, and a lot of them, but most people do better. So I would recommend you go higher, but you could certainly email me your profile, and once I know more about your background, I could better address this. Once I am accepted, how easy is it to get a scholarship? So it's a really good question. It depends on the school. Some schools will give out a lot of scholarship dollars. Some schools like Harvard and Stanford don't really do anything. So it's not a level playing field across all the schools. And let's say, a school might give scholarships to a third of the class. And on average, they might be a third of the tuition. So that kind of helps you to, think about things. You do want to have strong applications. That's for sure. And, while our clients do get a lot of scholarship dollars, they do that partly because they have high test scores. So you want to get a high test score and a strong application. You can certainly get scholarships, but it's hard to say specifically, how easy it is. I'm looking at going back in 2021, so applying in fall 2020. Would it be too soon to engage a consultant? Definitely not. So if you were to work with us, we have early MBA planning packages, which are designed for people just like you, where we're focusing on perfecting your story, helping to improve your extracurricular profile, helping you to make the right decisions at work, making sure that you're doing all the right things along the way. We have a lot of people in these packages, so that's what we would work on between now and the end of this year. And if you're interested, feel free to send me a note and we can follow up. How do INSEAD and LBS compare against an M7? Obviously, the geography get hired into will differ, yeah. But you have the same level of career prospects over a 20-year career. I would say they're pretty comparable. Some people might disagree with that, but I would say they're pretty comparable. These are the top schools in Europe. If you are thinking about, getting a top job in Europe, it's certainly a great avenue. We have clients in INSEAD and LBS and really all of the top schools around the world. I would say that they're rather comparable. The GMAT scores are lower, but that's often because people in Europe just don't focus on the test as much. I mean, here we have clients who are 20 years old already getting GMAT tutoring with us. Like, that would never happen in Europe. They don't even know what the GMAT is at age 20. So, I would say that they're top schools. And if you're looking over a 20-year career, you're probably not going to see much of a difference. And the reason for that is your success 20 years out depends on how hard you work, and not necessarily just on the school that you go to. Planning to get a JD MBA, great. We love working with dual degree applicants, which is why I'm working towards the GRE. Okay. As a person who also had low scores in quant courses in undergrad, economics, is it worth it for me now to take the GMAT as well? Well, I think it depends. I would want to look at your application in total before deciding. But what I can say is if you get a perfect score, then that would show your ability to perform well analytically. If you don't get a perfect score, then doing well in the GMAT could definitely add to your profile. Okay, so we'll go back to here, and feel free to ask any other questions that folks have. We have 2 different question lists. Okay, so may not be able to attend. Will this be recorded? Yes. What can an MBA aspirant do to boost his profile if there is a 2-year window before the final submission? So we kind of talked about this a little bit already in terms of making the right decisions from an extracurricular standpoint, showing leadership, trying to lead people at work, trying to do some more analytical things on the job. These are things that we would be doing over the couple of years between now and when you might apply. How important are extracurricular volunteer activities in the months leading up to my application? Is very important. Okay, here's why. A lot of people have strong profiles and then they let things fall. One of the things that I like to talk about with applicants as we kick things off is, what are you going to be doing when you're actually submitting the application? What are you doing in the interview? So I think the activities in the months leading up to the application are pretty important. How to address 6 months of employment left for a better opportunity? Are schools aware that people change jobs more often these days? Yes, schools are definitely aware of what's happening these days, so I wouldn't be concerned about that. Look, if you have one change after 6 months and you go to a better place, I think that's fine. If you're leaving every 6 months and you have 4 jobs in 2 years, that's when you might wonder whether you got fired, to be honest, or whether you're making the wrong decisions. So how do you address it? Well, most schools actually ask you in the application for a reason for leaving a job, and you'll have to tell them. So you can write a couple sentences that explains exactly why you left. What would I call a spectacular GMAT score? It really depends on the person and the school, right? I mean, for some schools, 780 is spectacular, right? For some schools, it might only be, 740, 750. I would say just for the average M7 school, really, really good, you're looking at like 770 plus. 760 plus is like very, very strong. 750 is a great score, but we get a lot of 750s these days. And 740 is also pretty good, above average, but not that much above average. How important is the undergraduate GPA in judging an application? And what is a good score if it's in percentile format? Yeah, great question. So undergraduate GPA is very important, right? Because this shows how you did in school and you're applying to go to school again. So pretty important. In terms of the percentiles, this depends on the school. Drastically different, percentiles, because for some schools, you might be in the class topper at 81, and so if you get a 79, that's fantastic. Whereas another school that might be, 91 is the top of the class. So there's not really one number. I wish there were, but there's not. What's the best way to set yourself apart when you have a lower GPA? Well, you want to take extra graduate level courses. You want to get a high GMAT score. You want to do analytical things at work to show that you're strong from a technical standpoint. At this point, we have so many really good questions, actually. I'm going to pick some that cover topics that we didn't talk about so far. Yeah, so how valuable is industry experience pre-MBA if you're looking to transition to a new industry post-MBA? Very good question. So it's not required, but it would certainly help. What I would say is if you can do some kind of an internship or volunteer assignment or even research, do something that shows them that you're serious about what you're diving into, right? You're not just saying I'm going to go into private equity just for the sake of doing it, but I'm actually going to prove to you that I can get there, because that's an industry that's tough to break into post MBA. Is it a good idea to apply when you're unemployed, or should you be working when you apply? If the answer is the latter, then working in a new place for 4 to 5 months will not look fishy. So it's always better to apply when you're working than when you're not working. I'd rather you be working for 4 to 5 months than not at all. So I would definitely try to find a job as soon as you can. You could certainly apply without working, but you're going to have a much better chance if you're working. In your experience, have you seen people with a recent employment gap of 1 year get an admit in an M7? I think it depends how recent and it depends why, right? So if you have a gap just because you got fired and couldn't get another job, that's not going to be good. But to answer your question directly, have I seen people? Yes, I have. And these people, had a gap for a particular reason, often a personal reason, and it was explained. And the rest of the profile looks strong, so that is something that can be overlooked. But gaps are not great, so we do want to make sure that there's a good story behind it. And if there is, then it could certainly work out. We'll probably take a couple more questions here. Should I enroll? Oh yeah, I liked seeing this one earlier. Should I enroll in my third choice college this year? Wait a couple years, get into my top choice of college. It depends what you want to do after school and how important the brand name is and what the third choice and top choice colleges are, right? So we need to know a lot more before kind of making that decision. But what I can say is for some places, you might be better off, being a big fish in a small pond. Something to consider if you look at going to the best school out there and you want to do maybe a big professional services job. Maybe a lot of people at that school want to do that as well. And would you get an interview or not? So sometimes it might be better to be a big fish in a small pond, but I would need to know more information. Any special advice for candidates looking to reapply? Yeah, so we have a lot of reapplicants here. The big things to think about, and we have a blog that we recently published. So go on our website, www.personalmbacoach.com/blog, and we have a lot of information there. But think about whether your goals were right. Think about whether you applied to the right set of schools. Think about your test scores, and think about the overall timing. You want to submit a strong application with either the same goals or pretty similar goals. And if they are different, then you really want to think through, why they're different. and make sure that you're conveying yourself in the best light. Maybe one last question. How does one maximize his GMAT score? Well, you can get tutoring. It can help you to maximize your GMAT score. You can study a lot. You can read a lot of books. Do you suggest applying to more than 5 schools in a round? I asked this because I heard some people apply to 10 plus in round 1. It depends on the person and depends on the timing. Right now, it is late March, and we have a decent amount of time to go. So yeah, if you wanted to do more than 5 schools in round 1, sure, there's plenty of time. If it's July 20th and you're just starting and you want to do 10 schools, that's probably not much time. So we had clients do 10 schools in a round, and they did well. They wanted to spread themselves across a number of programs for different reasons. So I generally say 5 to 6 is nice, but in some cases you can certainly do more. So we've done 7, 8, 9, 10. For us, the average numbers that we see are like 5 schools, but many do 6 or 7 or 8, and you have to think about what your overall risk tolerance is. But from a timing standpoint, you could certainly do it. So we are just about out of time. One thing I'll say is thank you so much for joining. It's always fun to do these. Always kind of weird when we're not talking to each other. I'm just talking to you. But thank you so much for all the questions. We got a fantastic number of questions beforehand, and I only answered some of them. And some questions here today, I believe I answered all the ones today. If you have any other questions, then please feel free to reach out. Send me an email, scott@personalmbacoach.com. Jump on the website. More than happy to schedule a consultation and talk about what we could do together. Look for the next webinar. We'll be doing some other webinars throughout the spring and summer, and I look forward to virtually seeing you soon. Thank you very much.